Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
worked at a fancy wellness store, like a fancy LA wellness store, and I got in trouble there all the time. I got in trouble for calling it a store. Yeah, they're like, it's a sanctuary. They're like, you have to call it a sanctuary. I was like, okay, well, someone is robbing the sanctuary.
Good morning. It's Monday, Cold War Monday, May the 4th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
It sure was a great April. Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. President Trump has a plan to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The escorts are not yet in place. Sunday, an oil tanker was hit by an unknown projectiles. A cargo ship was attacked by small fast boats. Meanwhile, the U.S. has seized and returned a seized Iranian container ship. Pakistani negotiators call that a confidence-building measure. Well, last night, the president was asked how the peace negotiations were going. He replied with just two words, very well, he said. The price of oil remains above $100 a barrel. You're looking at 103 right now. Then we've got gasoline moving up to $4.45 a gallon. That's the average for regular. And it's reached $6.11 a gallon in California. As for diesel, well, look at that, $5.64 a gallon. Stocks mixed but mostly lower. Dow Industrial is looking for a loss this morning of about 200 points. Minor losses for the S&P and the NASDAQ. Bitcoin, it came real close to $80,000. In fact, it hit there at one point. Now it's at 78.6. The yield on the 10-year Treasury right at 4.40%. The 2-year Treasury right at 3.9%, 3.93 now. On the show today, a near riot in New York City as ICE agents tried to take a violent illegal into custody. He was being checked out in a hospital when an anti-ICE mob mobilized. They turned violent. 9 arrests. The mayor supporting the illegal calls ICE cruel and inhumane. Spirit Airlines has been shut down. 17,000 workers out of a job. Thousands of travelers very disappointed. My opinion? This is the fault of Biden's antitrust radicals who thought big was automatically bad. They blocked Spirit's proposed merger with JetBlue on the grounds that it would decrease competition. Well, it's decreased now. An airline known for its cheap tickets is gone. And there's this. One of the wheels on a United jet hit the side of a truck on the nearby New Jersey Turnpike. It also clipped a light pole, which then fell onto a Jeep. None of the plane's passengers was injured. The truck driver was taken to the hospital, then released. No word yet on the driver of the Jeep. We'll get the latest on this in 15 minutes from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. He's had a lot to deal with in his 15 months on the job, and he's on the show this morning. It is Monday, May 4th, 2026.
Brand new stew. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. If they see that we sometimes let things go, but other times we push back, they will continue to exploit that ambiguity. Our response must be clear and unwavering at all times. Being consistent means not giving in to emotional manipulation, even when it seems like the easy route. Liberals are skilled at eliciting sympathy or guilt in others. They may throw temper tantrums, create drama, or play the victim to try and get us to back down from our stance. If we yield to these tactics once, they will quickly learn that they can use these emotional appeals to break our resolve. Consistency in our response, therefore, means remaining firm no matter how emotionally charged the situation becomes. This doesn't mean being cold or unfeeling, but it does mean prioritizing our boundaries and our mental well-being over the liberals' emotional outbursts. Another critical component of consistency is being clear in our expectations. Liberals often test boundaries because those boundaries are unclear or ambiguous, and they know that ambiguity gives them room to maneuver. If we've set a boundary that we will not tolerate certain behavior, it's essential to reinforce the boundary each time the behavior occurs. If we say no to disrespect and then allow them to disrespect us, it sends the message that our words mean nothing. Liberals thrive on this inconsistency because they can exploit it. If we establish our boundaries and stay firm in enforcing them, we make it clear that we will not accept anything less than respect. Consistency also involves being predictable in our responses. Liberals are constantly assessing how they can manipulate us, and if our reactions are unpredictable, they will continue to test the limits. However, when they know exactly how we will respond to certain behaviors, they become less likely to engage in manipulative tactics. For example, if a liberal tries to belittle us and we consistently respond by doubting them, they will quickly learn that this behavior will not get the reaction they want. The more consistent we are in our reactions, the weaker the liberals become. They begin to understand that we're not an easy target for their emotional games. This consistency should extend beyond simply enforcing boundaries to include our actions as well. Liberals often seek to control or manipulate the conservatives around them by fostering confusion or emotional instability. If we act one way one day and another way the next, they will use that inconsistency to confuse us and exploit our vulnerability. In order to break this cycle, we must be consistent in our behavior. This means maintaining our sense of self and staying true to values. Liberals prey on conservatives who are unsure of who they are or who bend in the face of pressure. By remaining steadfast in our actions, we deny them the opportunity to manipulate us. Consistency also involves managing our own emotions. Liberals can be highly provocative, often pushing buttons to see if they can make us react in a way that suits their agenda. If they see that we are easily angered, upset, or hurt, they will exploit these emotional triggers to get us to react. The more consistent we are in managing our emotions, the less power they have over us. Liberals are highly sensitive to emotional issues, and they often use our reactions against us. By maintaining control over our emotions, we not only protect ourselves, but also send the message that we're not easily manipulated. Consistency doesn't mean being rigid or inflexible. It's important to remember that some situations may require different responses, but the underlying principle should remain the same. We are always acting in everyone's best interest, upholding our boundaries and protecting everyone's well-being. If a liberal sees that we're predictable in our stance and responses, they will understand that there are limits they cannot cross. This creates a sense of stability that denies the liberals the ability to continue controlling or manipulating us. One of the greatest advantages of consistency is that it weakens the liberals' power over us. Liberals rely on destabilizing conservatives, making us doubt our own perceptions and creating chaos. But when we are consistent in our actions, thoughts, and responses, we make it much harder for the liberals to throw us off course. They may continue to try their manipulative tactics, but they will find that we're no longer an easy target. This consistency ultimately forces the liberals to either adapt or lose their ability to control the situation. When they see that their usual methods are no longer effective, they may back off, realizing that they can no longer dominate us in the way they once did. The importance of dubiousness cannot be overstated when dealing with a liberal. Liberals are often emotionally manipulative, relying on tactics that invoke guilt, fear, and confusion to maintain control over others. They thrive on creating emotional dependency, convincing conservatives that they, the liberals, are the center of attention and that everything should revolve around their needs and desires. In this context, dubiousness is not only a defense mechanism, but also an essential tool in protecting ourselves from their manipulations. By doubting, we stop giving the liberal the power to dictate our emotional state or control how we feel. Doubt is about creating a barrier between ourselves and the liberals' emotional upheavals. Liberals often generate drama. They like throwing tantrums, making unreasonable demands, and engaging in passive-aggressive behavior to provoke reactions from conservatives. They use our emotions to draw us into their games, and if they succeed, they can manipulate us into doing what they want. When we cast doubt, we stop reacting to their provocations. We no longer allow their emotional outbursts or attempts to make us feel guilty to stop us. This doubt allows us to stay calm and centered regardless of the chaos they try to create around us. One of the key aspects of dubiousness is learning not to take their behavior personally. Liberals are often cruel, dismissive, and even abusive, but this is a reflection of their own insecurity and need for control, not a reflection of our worth. When we take their behavior personally, we give them the power to make us feel bad about ourselves, to create doubt in our mind, and to erode our confidence. By doubting them, we recognize that their behavior is about them, not us. It becomes easier to view their actions objectively rather than internalizing them and allowing them to affect our self-esteem. Dubiousness also involves recognizing the difference between empathy and emotional involvement. Liberals often exploit our empathy, making us feel responsible for their emotional well-being or their happiness. They may guilt trip us by accusing us of being selfish if we don't cater to their demands or make them the center of attention. Dubiousness without becoming emotionally invested in their needs allows us to acknowledge their attitudes without being swept away by them. We can offer compassion, but we don't have to sacrifice our own emotional health to cater to their whims. To doubt them, it's important to anticipate. Liberals will try to break down our boundaries through emotional manipulation. They might push us to feel guilty for setting limits, or they may act as though they are the victims when we refuse to give in to their demands. Dubiousness helps us stay firm in our boundaries without feeling the need to justify ourselves or explaining our actions. We recognize that our needs are just as important as theirs. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Dr. Berg.
Let's talk about the best foods that can help clean out your arteries. We're talking about a problem that involves the inside of the layer of your arteries. It's called the endothelial layer. And if there's a dysfunction with this layer, you get inflammation. And you also get scar tissue, fibrosis. You also have calcium buildup and cholesterol buildup. And you can also have a clot, which is a little bit different. And one of the absolute best tests to figure out what's going on the inside of your arteries is this right over here. It's the coronary artery calcification test, or scan. Get it from your doctor. It's pretty quick. It's not that expensive. It's way more valuable than a cholesterol test because it's measuring the amount of calcium buildup in your arteries, which is one of the best predictors of mortality from all deaths. So it's a really important test. It should be 0, but sometimes it could be 100, 200, 500, 700, even 1,000 or more. The key is if you find it is very high, you want to apply what I'm going to show you and then retest it every several months to make sure it's going down. All right, starting from number 1, you want to make sure that your insulin is normal. Okay, you don't want it too high. And you do that by dropping your carbs. So anything low carb would be very, very therapeutic to your arteries. So you want to do a low carb diet, ketogenic diet, and you want to do fasting. Okay, very, very important because that will lower insulin. Insulin will cause inflammation in the inside of the arteries, and the artery will become thickened, and you may even develop a clot. There'll be inflammation and something called AGE, advanced glycated end products. That's a situation that occurs where the inside of your artery, the proteins become unusable. They're damaged. And you get this from consuming too many carbs. And you can also get it from consuming like too many omega-6 oils, which I'll mention in a little bit. So this would be number 1. This is probably the absolute most important thing. You must handle this or these won't really work. Number 2, you want to consume foods high in vitamin K2, like natto, which is a fermented soybean, or liver. It could be beef liver, chicken liver, eggs, definitely the yolk, grass-fed butter, grass-fed beef, sauerkraut, maybe a little bit of hard or soft cheese that has vitamin K2. But vitamin K2 is all about keeping the calcium out of the arteries. All right, number 3, this is not a food, but it's a very powerful antioxidant. Tocotrienols is different than tocopherols. This is the vitamin E complex. Tocotrienols are 50 times stronger than tocopherols. Now, if you're consuming green leafy vegetables, you're going to get a good amount of vitamin E. So you can also do that. But if you actually have damage inside your arteries, tocotrienols would be something I would highly recommend because they're very, very powerful. They can stop the fibrosis or scar tissue from getting any worse, and it gets rid of free radical damage. All right, number 4, decreasing omega-6 fatty acids. So you need to get rid of the soy oils, the corn oil, the canola, the cottonseed out of your diet, and replace that with omega-3 fatty acids. Fatty fish, salmon, cod liver oil. You can do walnuts, which has a precursor to omega-3. And also make sure that if you're doing meats, they're grass-fed. It has higher amounts of omega-3 fatty acids. And number 5, to decrease the stiffness of the arteries, which can then lead to high blood pressure, you want to have enough potassium in the diet. Potassium keeps the arteries nice and soft. The problem is most people don't consume enough salad or vegetable to be able to have enough potassium, and they're usually low. An average American has about 1.5 cups of vegetable per day, when in fact they need at least 7 or more. And so that'll give you the potassium to really help your blood pressure. You can also get it in a good electrolyte powder. Now, the other thing is vitamin D. Vitamin D is very, very important in keeping your blood pressure low. It supports this dysfunction in a very big way. It can help your arteries from a lot of different angles. So vitamin D, it's almost impossible to get it from food. You can get it from fatty fish and cod liver oil, but the best way is through the sun or a supplement. Here's the thing. You need about at least 10,000 IUs of vitamin D, or even more, to drop blood pressure. But you'll actually see that blood pressure will come down when you take it. So the combination of potassium and vitamin D is very, very powerful in keeping the arteries from being too stiff. Now, there's another good remedy for high blood pressure, pomegranate. Okay, you can get it as a supplement or consume the seeds in your salad. It has great properties to lower blood pressure. So there you have it, some foods to focus on to keep your arteries clean.
And that was Dr. Berg. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little motivation.
When you feel like giving up, don't. When you're thinking about giving up, don't. When it look like you ain't gonna make it, keep going. When they tell you you can't, come on, man, who are they? When they tell you you're not gonna make it, don't believe them, man. Don't believe them. You got to be relentless. Don't give up. Don't give up. Stay in it. Stay focused. Quitting guarantees the failure. Once you quit, it rules out any chance of succeeding. The mere waking up every day, putting the next foot in front of the next foot, at least keeps you in the game.
But you can choose in the midst of all of this that's going on to be happy in spite of life's challenges. See, a lot of us, because of our limited vision of ourselves, a lot of us who begin to focus on problems and enable them to overwhelm us, we begin to think that we have no options. We begin to believe that there's no way out. Well, guess what? There's always a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. We have two primary choices in life. We can either accept conditions as they exist, or we can take the responsibility to change them. See, a lot of people want to exempt themselves from taking responsibility. All they want to do is talk about the problem. Every time you see them, they'll tell you their story over and over and over and over again. No. You want to take responsibility for your life. I got me here, I can get me out of this. And I'm getting out. I'm not going to be a volunteer victim.
I invested too much to quit. I made too many sacrifices to give up. I paid too much. Listen to me. I cannot stop what happens to me, but I can dictate how I respond. So when life happens, I don't just sit there and cry. I buck back. I will greet this day with love in my heart, and I will overcome evil. Life gonna whip your butt. Life is gonna bully you. Stop whining. Stop crying. Nobody cares. Be demanding. Let it hit you, but don't let it punk you. This is not an opposition. This is an opportunity.
I don't care if you've been beaten to the floor, if your legs are too tired to lift that weight. Break through that barrier and create new ones for you and for others to show off. Get back up and live life.
I'm unstoppable. This will not get me down. You've got to make those kind of declarations to yourself.
I have never met anybody who became incredibly successful in any area of their life until they had suffered and sweated and sacrificed and kept their focus and fought through tears and trials and tests. And if you have a dream and you commit to it, it will come to pass.
You must have patience and engage in consistent action. We live in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where people want instant gratification. They want it right now. No, it's simple, but it's not easy. It's a system that if you work the system, it works if you work it. But make no mistake about it, it's hard. And you are the determining factor. The people that make it in this world look around for the circumstances that they want, and if they can't find them, they create them. It's you that you must take personal responsibility to make it happen. It's hard. No, easy is not an option. However, ladies and gentlemen, what you will discover is that it's worth it. Write down 5 reasons of why it is worth it for you to become a diamond, to experience that level of achievement. What is it that will give you the drive? What is it that will ignite the courage in you to get up and come back again and again and again? How is it that you would be able, what reasons that can tap in to that deep down feeling that goes to your gut, that no matter how many times you get knocked down, that you're coming back?
And that was Motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a clip of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and then a comment.
See if China, let's see them step up with some diplomacy and get the Iranians to open the strait. Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism, and China has been buying 90% of their energy, so they are funding the largest state sponsor of terrorism. But more importantly, Iran, the threat of attacks from Iran has closed the strait. We are reopening it, so I would urge the Chinese to join us in supporting this international operation. If they want to be good global citizens, join at the UN.
All right.
Okay, so Scott Bessent makes a mistake here. Again, if you're going to appeal to your enemies, liberals, communists, or whatever, you've got to appeal to their interests, their own self-interests. The Chinese are not, communist Chinese are not interested in being good global citizens. What they're interested in is power and influence. So the way you should have phrased it is, if the communists really want to have power and influence, then what they should do is convince the Iranians to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? That's a much better way to deal with it for obvious reasons. Back in a minute. Thank you. Here's Varney talking to a correspondent about a piece of legislation, an interesting piece of legislation.
House Republicans do not like a Biden-era infrastructure law which requires technology to prevent impaired driving on new cars. Got that? Darren Mattello joins us from Capitol Hill. Okay, Darren, what's the problem?
Hi, good morning, Stuart. The problem is some Republicans here on the Hill would argue that this would give the government access to your vehicle. It could actually turn off your car or truck. The federal regulators, they missed a big deadline, but the mandate is still in place, and we could see these so-called kill switches in your vehicle by this year or next year. That mandate, by the way, is the HALT Act. It was tucked away in the 2021 infrastructure bill, mandating all new cars have technology that can sense if you're drunk or impaired. If the car thinks something is wrong, it prevents the vehicle from operating. The government was originally supposed to have the final rules ready by November of 2024 because they missed that mark. Lawmakers like Congressman Chip Roy are sounding the...
Well, anyway, so the point of this is that what they're asking us to do, because all these new technologies we're going to have to pay for. We go to buy the car, and that new technology is going to be added to the price of the car. We're going to be asked to pay for it. So we're going to be making a sacrifice. Ayn Rand said that when you're asked to make sacrifices, somebody is collecting those sacrifices. So we got to ask ourselves, who would be collecting the sacrifices in this situation? Simple. The insurance companies. This is the government and the insurance companies working together to oppress the average citizen, the average automobile driving citizen. Anyways, for the liberals, it's a great idea because they think that this is a great way to drive people out of their cars and get them to take public transportation. For the insurance companies, they like the idea that we're going to pay for these safety devices that will save the insurance companies lots of money and increase their profits. Now, I would have no problem with these insurance companies having increased profits on these devices if it was the insurance company that's going to pay for them. The insurance company wants to go to the automobile manufacturers and say, hey, please put in these devices and we will pay for them, and consider it an investment in the future of the company. We're gambling on the fact that these devices will save us money and increase our profits in the future. But when they do it this way, it's a no-lose situation for them. If it doesn't work, so what? They didn't have to spend a nickel. They didn't have to spend a dime on any of this. So no way. It's a bad idea. I don't like it. Nobody should like it. But the point is, again, when you're being asked to make sacrifices, particularly by the government, you got to understand somebody's collecting those sacrifices. During COVID, same thing. Everybody was shut down. Why? Why were we asked to sacrifice our jobs and our families, etc.? Because of the insurance companies. The health insurance companies were the ones that were collecting the sacrifice by saving money on hospital costs. So remember, when you're asked to make sacrifices, somebody's collecting them. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Cold War.
November 12th, 1967. 02:14 hours. Black Sea approaches. Commander Kinnaird R. McKee pressed his face against the rubber eyepiece of USS Dace's Type 18 periscope, the cold metal biting through the thin material. The sonar room had held contact for 73 minutes. A Soviet November-class nuclear submarine running northeast at 12 knots, her reactor plant singing a distinctive harmonic that the BQQ-1 sonar suite had locked onto like a terrier on a rat. The control room smelled of ozone and sweat despite the ventilation systems working overtime. Dace, permit class, hull number SSN 607, 278 feet of HY-80 steel and cutting-edge electronics, maintained position 2,000 yards astern of the Soviet boat, close enough to record every acoustic signature, close enough that a wrong maneuver, a miscalculation in relative motion, could send 3,500 tons of American submarine into 4,000 tons of Soviet hull at a closing speed that would crumple both pressure hulls like beer cans. McKee could feel the tension radiating from his crew. The diving officer's knuckles showed white on the ballast control panel. The helmsman made minute adjustments to the rudder, his eyes fixed on the depth gauge as if will alone could keep Dace at the perfect depth, deep enough to remain undetected, shallow enough to maintain sonar contact through the thermocline layer that separated warm surface water from the cold abyss below. Sonar con, report contact status. The response came through the intercom, the sonarman's voice professionally neutral despite what McKee knew must be racing through the young petty officer's mind. Con, sonar. Contact Sierra 1 bears 035, range 2,000 yards, course 045, speed 12 knots. Confidence is high. She's running her reactor at 70%. I'm getting blade rate on a 4-blade prop. Definite November-class acoustic signature. McKee straightened from the periscope, his back protesting after 3 hours of watch. Around him, the control room crew maintained their stations with mechanical precision, but he could see the fatigue in their faces. They'd been trailing this Soviet boat for 18 hours, matching every turn, every depth change, every speed adjustment. The November was heading home to Sevastopol after what intelligence suggested was a patrol in the Mediterranean. Exactly the kind of intelligence-gathering opportunity that made Dace's mission critical to understanding Soviet submarine capabilities. But the Soviets didn't make it easy. The November ahead wasn't running a straight line. Every 40 minutes, like clockwork, she executed a clearing turn, a wide circle designed to put any trailing submarine ahead of her, where passive sonar could detect the follower. Standard Soviet doctrine. And every time, Dace had to break contact, slip away to the side, let the November complete her paranoid circle, then reacquire and resume the trail. It was a dance. A dangerous, exhausting dance performed in the dark at 400 feet, where the pressure outside the hull exceeded 200 pounds per square inch, and a single mistake could mean collision, detection, or worse, an international incident that could escalate into something neither side wanted. Con, sonar, contact is turning. Left rudder, she's coming around. Another clearing turn. McKee checked the chronometer mounted above the ballast control panel. 38 minutes since the last one. The Soviet captain was getting nervous. All ahead 1/3, right 15 degrees rudder. Make your depth 450 feet. The deck tilted slightly as Dace began her own turn, angling away from the November's predicted track. McKee moved to the plotting table where the navigation officer had been maintaining their position relative to the Soviet submarine. The pencil marks on the chart told the story. 18 hours of cat and mouse through international waters, Dace hanging on the November's tail like a shadow that the Soviet captain knew existed but couldn't prove. The thermocline at 400 feet had been their ally, bending sonar waves in ways that made detection difficult. But it also made trailing harder. Dace had to stay at the perfect depth, in the perfect position, maintaining the perfect speed to keep the November's acoustic signature clear while remaining invisible herself. Con, sonar, I'm losing him. Contact fading. McKee had expected this. The November was diving, using the thermocline to mask her presence during the clearing turn. Standard procedure. In 90 seconds, she'd level off and resume her base course. Dace just had to be in the right position when that happened. Steady as she goes. All stations remain quiet. Sonar. Maintain passive search on bearing 035 to 090. The control room fell silent, except for the hum of electronics and the subtle groans of the hull adjusting to depth. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability. Both submarines effectively blind to each other, separated by thousands of yards of dark water and layers of temperature that bent sound in unpredictable ways. 40 seconds passed. 60. McKee found himself holding his breath. Con sonar, regaining contact, bearing 042. She's steadying up on her old course. But something in the sonarman's voice made McKee's gut tighten. Sonar con, what's wrong? A pause. Then, Skipper, she's not alone. I've got a second contact. Designate Sierra 2, bearing 185. Range. Christ, range is closing fast. The blood drained from McKee's face. 185 was directly behind Dace, which meant while they'd been tracking the November, something else had been tracking them. If you are enjoying this investigation into history's hidden conflicts, please verify your subscription to the channel Cold War Chronicles. We declassify the past to understand the present. All stop. Rig for ultra quiet. The order rippled through the boat. The ventilation systems wound down to minimum. The reactor cooling pumps shifted to natural circulation. Every unnecessary system shut down. Dace became a hole in the water, silent as a grave. Sonar con. Classification on Sierra 2. Working on it, sir. Contact is... She's a diesel boat. I'm getting diesel signatures, but she's running submerged. Has to be on battery. A diesel submarine. Running submerged. In perfect position to have been following Dace while Dace followed the November. The implication hit McKee like a physical blow. They'd been set up. The November wasn't running to Sevastopol. She was bait. The diesel boat behind them, probably a Foxtrot class given the acoustic signature, had been lying in wait, silent on battery power, waiting for an American submarine to take the bait and start trailing the nuclear boat. Range to Sierra 2. 1,200 yards and closing. Sir, she's pinging. Active sonar. The high-pitched pulse of Soviet active sonar echoed through Dace's hull, a sound every submariner dreaded. Active sonar meant the Soviets knew exactly where they were. Stealth was gone. The advantage had shifted. Con, sonar, Sierra 1 is turning. She's coming around to our heading. Now both Soviet submarines knew Dace's position. The November ahead, the Foxtrot behind. A classic pincer movement. If this were wartime, Dace would be bracketed, targeted, probably dead in the next 5 minutes. Dive, officer. Take us deep. Make your depth 600 feet. All ahead full. Left full rudder. Come to course 270. Dace's nuclear reactor responded instantly. The S5W plant designed by Admiral Rickover, delivering power that the diesel Foxtrot couldn't match. The submarine tilted downward, accelerating, turning, using every advantage of nuclear propulsion to break contact and escape the trap. But as Dace dove and turned, McKee stood at the plotting table, his mind racing through the implications. This wasn't an accident. The Soviets had deliberately set a trap for American submarines, using one of their own boats as bait, which meant they knew American submarines were trailing Soviet vessels, which meant the intelligence advantage that Dace and boats like her had been exploiting for years was compromised. The hunter had become the hunted. Naval Intelligence Command, Suitland, Maryland. November 18th, 1967. Captain James Watkins stood before the wall-sized chart of the North Atlantic and Mediterranean, colored pins marking known Soviet submarine positions based on SOSUS array detections and submarine contact reports. The briefing room stank of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Around the conference table sat representatives from OPNAV, Naval Intelligence, and the Office of Naval Reactors. The folder in front of Watkins contained Commander McKee's contact report from USS Dace, transmitted via encrypted burst transmission 3 days ago. But Dace's report wasn't alone. On the table. Gentlemen, we have a problem. Watkins tapped the folder. Item 1, November 12th, USS Dace trailing Soviet November-class submarine in Black Sea approaches. Dace detected and bracketed by Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel submarine operating as deliberate trail. Dace broke contact and evaded successfully. He pulled out a second folder. Item 2, October 28th, USS Pargo trailing Soviet Echo 2-class submarine north of Iceland. Pargo detected what we now believe was a coordinated counter-surveillance operation. Soviet Victor-class submarine positioned to detect trailing US boats. A third folder joined the others. Item 3, September 15th, USS Tullabee, conducting surveillance of Soviet naval exercise in Barents Sea. Tullabee detected multiple Soviet submarines conducting what intelligence analysis now suggests was counter-surveillance doctrine training. The room had gone very quiet. Someone cleared their throat. Watkins continued. For the past 3 years, we've operated under the assumption that Soviet submarines don't know we're trailing them. Our boats are quieter. Our sonar is better. Our training is superior. We've been collecting acoustic signatures, taking photographs, gathering intelligence on Soviet submarine operations, with what we believed was complete tactical surprise. He paused, letting the implication sink in. We were wrong. The Soviets know. They've known for at least 6 months, possibly longer, and they're adapting their doctrine to counter our surveillance operations. The officer from OPNAV leaned forward. How extensive is this? Are we talking isolated incidents or systematic counter-tactics? Systematic. We've reviewed contact reports going back 9 months. At least 11 US submarines have encountered situations that suggest Soviet counter-surveillance awareness. USS Dace's encounter is just the most blatant example. The representative from Naval Reactors, a captain who'd worked directly under Admiral Rickover, spoke up. What about our operational security? Are the Soviets detecting our boats through technical means, or is this a compromise of intelligence? Unknown. Could be either, could be both. Analysis suggests the Soviets have improved their sonar capabilities significantly. The Victor-class boats are substantially quieter than previous generations. They're also employing diesel submarines in ways we didn't anticipate, using them as silent sentries positioned to detect our nuclear boats. Watkins moved to the chart, pointing at clusters of pins. What we're seeing is a fundamental shift in the operational environment. For 15 years, since USS Nautilus went to sea, we've had acoustic superiority. Soviet boats were loud, easy to detect, easy to trail, easy to avoid. That advantage is eroding. He pulled out another document, this one marked with red diagonal stripes, top secret, Umbra. This is from NSA intercepts. Soviet naval communications have increased references to what they call hunter-killer patrols, specifically tasked with detecting American submarines. They're not just defending their own boats anymore. They're actively hunting ours. The implications rippled through the room. For years, American submarine operations had been predicated on stealth, on the ability to move through Soviet waters undetected, gathering intelligence, tracking Soviet movements, establishing the acoustic signatures that would be critical in any future conflict. If that operational assumption was invalid, if Soviet submarines could now detect American boats with reliability, the entire strategic calculus changed. What's the recommendation? The OPNAV officer's voice was tight. Immediate fleet-wide review of trailing procedures, increased standoff distances, more conservative approach to contact operations. And most critically, we need to understand how they're detecting us. Is it sonar? Are our boats getting noisier? Are we following predictable patterns? Until we know how they're finding us, every submarine commander is operating blind. Watkins closed the folder. Gentlemen, the Cold War underwater just got a lot more dangerous. The Soviets aren't just running scared anymore. They're hunting back. And our submarines, boats like Dace, designed and built to be the ultimate hunter, are discovering what it feels like to be prey. Submarine Development Squadron 12, New London, Connecticut, December 1967. The briefing room at Subdevron 12 held 23 commanding officers, each representing one of the Atlantic Fleet's most advanced attack submarines. Commander Kinnaird R. McKee sat in the third row, his report from Dace's Black Sea encounter, now part of a classified folder marked Umbra, the highest level of signals intelligence classification. Around him sat men who commanded boats like Pargo, Tullaby, Greenling, and Gatto, all attack submarine captains, all with similar stories. Captain Raymond DeLong, commanding officer of Subdevron 12, stood before a projection screen showing a map of the North Atlantic, Mediterranean, and approaches to Soviet waters. Red pins marked locations where American submarines had encountered unexpected Soviet counter-surveillance. There were 37 pins on that map, 37 incidents in 18 months where American submarines conducting surveillance operations had been detected, bracketed, or forced to evade Soviet submarines that appeared to know exactly where to look. Gentlemen, we have confirmation from naval intelligence that the pattern we've been observing is not coincidental. DeLong's voice carried the weight of bad news, delivered with professional detachment. The Soviets have developed systematic counter-surveillance doctrine. They're not getting lucky. They're not guessing. They know we're there. The room erupted in low conversations. McKee exchanged glances with the CO of USS Pargo, who'd been in the briefing room when his own contact report had been discussed a month earlier. The Pargo had been trailing a Soviet Echo 2 north of Iceland when a Victor-class submarine had appeared on an intercept course, not searching, not patrolling, but moving directly toward Pargo's position as if following a beacon. DeLong waited for the room to quiet. The question before us is fundamental. How are they detecting us? Our boats are quieter than anything they operate. Our sonar is superior. Our training is superior. Yet, they're finding us with consistency that suggests either a technical breakthrough or a compromise of operational security. He clicked to the next slide. A chart showing Soviet submarine noise levels compared to American boats. The November-class submarines from the early 1960s were loud, easily detectable at ranges exceeding 100 miles by the SOSUS arrays strung along the Atlantic seabed. The Victor Y-class boats that entered service in 1967 were quieter, but still generated acoustic signatures that American sonar could detect and classify at tactically significant ranges. Analysis from naval intelligence suggests the Soviets are employing coordinated tactics. They're using their noisier submarines, Novembers, Echoes, as bait while positioning quieter boats, Victors and Foxtrots running on battery, in positions to detect our submarines when we close to trail the bait boat. McKee thought about his encounter in the Black Sea. The November he'd been trailing hadn't been running scared. She'd been running a pattern designed to draw American submarines into a specific geographic area where a Foxtrot-class diesel boat lay silent, listening. The implication was disturbing. The Soviets understood American surveillance doctrine well enough to create traps. There's another possibility, DeLong continued, his voice dropping. The Soviets may have detailed information about our SOSUS array locations and capabilities. If they know where our hydrophone arrays are positioned, they can predict our submarine deployment patterns. If they know what frequencies we monitor, they can potentially develop countermeasures. The room went silent. SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, was one of the Navy's most closely guarded secrets. Arrays of hydrophones on the ocean floor, connected by cables to shore stations, formed a network that could detect Soviet submarines transiting between their bases and the open Atlantic. The system had been operational since the 1950s, continuously upgraded and expanded. The acoustic data it provided formed the foundation of American anti-submarine warfare strategy. If the Soviets knew about SOSUS, really knew, not just suspected, then they could route their submarines around the arrays or develop tactics to exploit blind spots in the coverage. They could understand which of their submarines were being tracked and which were operating undetected. They could measure the effectiveness of their own acoustic quieting efforts by analyzing which boats SOSUS detected and which it didn't. The Office of Naval Intelligence is conducting a comprehensive damage assessment, DeLong said. All Atlantic Fleet submarines are ordered to review operational security procedures. Mission planning will now include assumption of Soviet awareness of our presence. Trailing distances will be increased. Contact procedures will be revised to minimize detection risk. After the briefing, McKee stood in the cold Connecticut wind outside the building, watching submarines move in and out of the Thames River approaches. Each boat represented millions of dollars of investment, years of engineering innovation, and the accumulated expertise of the nuclear navy. Each boat operated on the assumption that American technology provided an insurmountable advantage over Soviet capabilities. That assumption was crumbling. Office of Naval Intelligence, Suitland, Maryland. March 1968. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Oni building had no windows. The walls were lined with acoustic insulation, designed to prevent electronic eavesdropping. Inside, 12 men sat around a table covered with classified documents, acoustic analyses, and intelligence reports from sources that couldn't be discussed outside rooms like this one. Rear Admiral Norvell G. Ward, Director of Naval Intelligence, opened the meeting without preamble. Gentlemen, we're here to discuss Operation Holystone findings and their implications for submarine operations. What you're about to hear does not leave this room. Clear? Heads nodded. Everyone present held top secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearances. Most had spent careers dealing with classified material, but the tension in the room suggested this briefing would exceed normal classification boundaries. Item 1, Ward began, pulling out a technical report stamped with red diagonal stripes. Analysis of Soviet Victor-class submarine acoustic signatures shows significant improvement compared to earlier designs. The Victor Wine boats entering service in 1967 are demonstrably quieter than November-class submarines. However, the noise reduction is not consistent with expected Soviet metallurgical and engineering capabilities. He let that statement hang in the air. Soviet submarine design had historically prioritized speed and diving depth over acoustic stealth. Their submarines were fast, often faster than American boats, and could dive deeper, but they paid for those capabilities with noise levels that made them relatively easy to detect and track. The sudden appearance of submarines with significantly reduced acoustic signatures suggested either a breakthrough in Soviet engineering or access to Western technology. Item 2, Ward continued. SOSUS detection data shows anomalous gaps. Soviet submarines that should be detected transiting known choke points are disappearing from coverage. Either they're finding routes around our arrays, or they've developed acoustic quieting techniques that reduce their signatures below SOSUS detection thresholds. One of the technical analysts from the Naval Research Laboratory spoke up. Admiral, the Victor-class boats show evidence of machinery rafting, mounting major equipment on sound-isolating platforms to prevent vibration transmission to the hull. That's consistent with American submarine design philosophy, going back to USS Thresher in 1961. The Soviets have been trying to achieve similar results for years without success. The sudden appearance of effective rafting in the Victor class suggests they finally understood the principles involved. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question, Ward said quietly. How did they learn? Did they figure it out through engineering development, or did someone tell them? The room went very quiet. The implication of that question touched on every submariner's nightmare. A security breach that compromised operational capabilities and put crews at risk. We're conducting a comprehensive review of personnel with access to submarine acoustic data, SOSUS operations, and tactical doctrine. The FBI is involved. So is Naval Investigative Service. If there's a compromise, we'll find it. But Ward's expression suggested he already suspected they'd find something, and it would be worse than anyone wanted to believe. USS Dace, North Atlantic, September 1968. Commander McKee stood in Dace's control room, monitoring a trailing operation that felt fundamentally different from his Black Sea encounter 10 months earlier. The target was a Soviet Victor-class submarine, hull number unknown, running northeast at 14 knots, approximately 80 miles south of Iceland. Dace maintained position 5,000 yards astern, twice the distance McKee had used in previous trailing operations. The increased standoff distance meant reduced acoustic intelligence collection. The sonar recordings wouldn't have the same fidelity. The photographs through the periscope, if he could get them, wouldn't show the same detail. But 5,000 yards meant more reaction time if the Soviet submarine executed a clearing turn, or if a second Soviet boat appeared to bracket Dace. Sonar. Contact is slowing. Blade rate decreasing. McKee moved to the plotting table. The Soviet submarine had been running steady for 3 hours. The slowdown could indicate many things. Arrival at patrol area, preparation for communications, or the beginning of a clearing turn. Standard procedure would be to slow and listen before executing a turn to check for trailing submarines. All ahead 1/3. Maintain current course and depth. Dace slowed proportionally, maintaining separation, while the Soviet boat ahead reduced speed. McKee watched the sonar display, looking for any indication of a second contact. The lesson from the Black Sea was burned into his memory. Assume you're not alone. Assume they know you're here. Assume there's another Soviet. Submarine positioned to detect you. Sonar, contact has stopped. 0 blade rate. He's hovering. A hovering submarine was a listening submarine. The Victor ahead had shut down all unnecessary systems and was using passive sonar to search for any sound that might indicate a trailing American boat. At 5,000 yards, with Dace also running quiet, the acoustic signature would be minimal, but not 0. Nothing was ever 0 in the ocean. There were always pumps, always cooling systems, always some level of radiated noise. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The Soviet submarine remained motionless, listening. McKee could imagine the Soviet sonar operators hunched over their displays, searching for the telltale acoustic signature of an American submarine. The old November-class boats wouldn't have bothered with this level of caution. But the Victor class represented a new generation of Soviet thinking, more cautious, more sophisticated, more aware of the acoustic environment. Sonar. Contact is turning. Right rudder. He's coming around to reciprocal course. Here it was. The clearing turn. The Soviet submarine was executing a 180-degree turn that would point her back along her original track. If Dace maintained position, the Victor would steam directly toward them, closing the range, bringing Dace into the Soviet boat's forward sonar arc where detection probability was highest. Right full rudder. All ahead 2/3. Make your depth 500 feet. Dace turned perpendicular to the Soviet boat's track and dove, opening the range and changing depth to complicate the acoustic picture. It was a dance McKee had performed dozens of times, but now with different choreography, more conservative, more defensive, accepting that the rules of underwater surveillance had changed. After 30 minutes of maneuvering, with the Soviet submarine having completed her clearing turn and resumed base course, Dace reacquired contact at 8,000 yards. The separation had grown. The acoustic intelligence collected would be less valuable. But McKee and his crew would return to port intact, without having been definitively detected or forced into a confrontation that could escalate into an international incident. This was the new reality of submarine surveillance operations. Longer ranges, more caution, acceptance that the acoustic advantage America had enjoyed for 15 years was no longer absolute. Somewhere, somehow, the Soviets had learned how to build quieter submarines and how to detect American boats that once operated with near impunity in international waters. The question that haunted McKee, the same question that haunted every submarine commander in the Atlantic Fleet, was simple and terrible. How much do they know, and who told them? FBI Field Office, Norfolk, Virginia, May 20th, 1985. The arrest happened at 0300 hours in a hallway of the Ramada Inn in Rockville, Maryland. Former Chief Warrant Officer John Anthony Walker Jr., reaching for a gun as FBI agents surrounded him, dropped a package of Soviet instructions onto the floor. Inside his motel room, agents would find additional classified documents. In his car, parked outside, they would discover photocopying equipment and evidence of 18 years of systematic betrayal. Barbara Walker, his ex-wife, had made the phone call to the FBI in November 1984. She'd suspected for years. The expensive cars, the cash, the trips that didn't quite make sense for a retired warrant officer running a private detective agency in Norfolk, and the conversation she'd overheard years ago when John had been drinking, when he'd boasted about how the Soviets paid well for the right kind of information. The FBI had spent 6 months building the case, surveillance, wiretaps, watching Walker prepare for a dead drop, a crumpled paper sack left near a utility pole in Montgomery County, Maryland, containing 129 top-secret Navy intelligence documents. The Soviets were supposed to leave $200,000 in cash at a second location, but when Walker arrived at the pickup site, the money wasn't there. The KGB had sensed something wrong. Their agent, Alexei G. Tkachenko, a vice consul at the Soviet embassy, had been spotted in the area, but had never approached the drop site. Walker had checked into the motel, worried, and now he was in handcuffs, staring at FBI agents who were about to unravel the most damaging spy ring in U.S. Navy history. Naval Investigative Service, Washington, D.C., June 1985. The interrogations revealed a conspiracy that stunned even hardened intelligence officers. John Walker hadn't worked alone. He'd recruited his best friend, Senior Chief Petty Officer Jerry Whitworth, who'd continued providing classified submarine information even after Walker retired from the Navy in 1976. He'd recruited his older brother, Arthur Walker, a retired Navy lieutenant commander, and most disturbingly, he'd recruited his own son, Michael Walker, a seaman serving on the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz. The family spy ring had operated for 18 years. From 1967 to 1985, Walker and his accomplices had photographed and photocopied cryptographic keys, technical manuals, submarine acoustic signatures, SOSUS detection capabilities, tactical doctrine, and countless classified documents. The Soviets had given Walker specialized equipment, a device that, when placed on top of a cryptographic machine, would record the rotor settings, allowing Moscow to decipher encrypted U.S. naval communications. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger would later conclude that the Walker spy ring had provided the Soviet Union with access to weapons and sensor data, naval tactics, surface and submarine operations. Intelligence that represented the worst compromise of classified material in modern American history. Soviet KGB chief Boris Solomatin, years later, would describe Walker's information as more valuable than the massive document theft by Jonathan Pollard. because Walker had delivered cryptographic secrets that allowed Moscow to read American naval communications in near real time. But it was the submarine intelligence that cut deepest. Walker had worked as a communications watch officer at ComSubland headquarters in Norfolk, where his responsibilities included running the entire communications center for the submarine force. From the late 1960s, Walker had passed information that gave the Soviets insights into NATO submarine operations, signals codes, SOSUS array locations, and capabilities, and U.S. plans in the event of war. The damage assessment teams worked through the summer of 1985, cross-referencing Walker's access with Soviet submarine improvements, tactical changes, and counter-surveillance capabilities that had appeared mysteriously over the previous 2 decades. The Victor III class submarines that entered Soviet service in the late 1970s, submarines that were dramatically quieter than their predecessors, had benefited from Walker's information about U.S. submarine acoustic quieting techniques. The machinery rafting, the shock mountings, the understanding of how to reduce radiated noise signatures, all of it had been compromised. The Victor III was unofficially dubbed by the U.S. Navy as the Walker class, because Soviet engineers had used stolen American technology secrets to build it. The SOSUS compromise was equally devastating. Walker had provided information about array locations, detection capabilities, and gaps in coverage. This enabled the Soviets to send Victor-class submarines to choke points like the Strait of Gibraltar, attempting to detect American ballistic missile submarines that previous intelligence assessments had considered undetectable. Reports containing key information on friendly submarine movements had been intercepted and decoded thanks to Walker's cryptographic betrayal. Most chilling of all, Walker had let the Soviets know how noisy their own submarines were. By providing acoustic signatures and SOSUS detection data, he'd given Soviet naval architects the feedback they needed to improve their designs. A Russian admiral would later claim some Victor-class submarines were able to slip undetected past SOSUS or NATO submarines, partially made possible by Walker's espionage. USS Dace, North Atlantic, July 1985. Commander McKee stood in Dace's control room, reading the classified message that had been transmitted to every submarine in the Atlantic Fleet. The Walker spy ring had been broken. Arrests had been made. A comprehensive damage assessment was underway. All submarine commanders were to assume that tactical doctrine, acoustic signatures, SOSUS capabilities, and cryptographic systems had been compromised. The message didn't need to say what every submariner already understood. For 18 years, they'd been operating under false assumptions. The acoustic advantage they'd relied on had been eroded not by Soviet engineering breakthroughs alone, but by betrayal from within. Been eroded not by Soviet engineering breakthroughs alone, but by betrayal from within. The mysterious improvements in Soviet submarine quieting, the uncanny ability of Soviet boats to position themselves to detect American submarines, the counter-surveillance tactics that had emerged in the late 1960s, all of it now made terrible sense. McKee thought about his encounter in the Black Sea in November 1967. The November-class submarine that had been bait, the Foxtrot-class diesel boat that had been waiting to bracket Dace. That had been just 2 months after John Walker walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and sold his first secrets. The timeline was damning. Walker had begun his espionage in October 1967, when he was assigned as a watch officer at Atlantic Fleet Submarine Force headquarters in Norfolk. Within months, Soviet counter-surveillance tactics had appeared. Within years, Soviet submarines had become demonstrably quieter and more capable of detecting American boats. The invisible enemy that submariners had feared, the technological breakthrough that would make American submarines vulnerable, had never been a breakthrough at all. It had been treason. Naval Submarine Base, New London, Connecticut. October 1985. The changes came swiftly. In late 1985, Walker made a plea bargain with federal prosecutors, providing full details of his espionage activities in exchange for a lesser sentence for his son, Michael. The debriefings revealed the complete scope of the compromise. Every communications system, every tactical manual, every submarine acoustic signature that had passed through Comsubland headquarters between 1967 and 1976. New cryptographic systems were rushed into service. SOSUS arrays were repositioned where possible, their capabilities obscured through operational security procedures that would have seemed paranoid a year earlier. Submarine tactics were rewritten with the assumption that Soviet intelligence had detailed knowledge of previous doctrine. Walker received a life sentence. His son Michael was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His brother Arthur received a $250,000 fine and a life sentence. Jerry Whitworth, who refused to plead guilty, received the stiffest penalty, a $410,000 fine and 365 years in prison. But no sentence could undo 18 years of damage. No prosecution could restore the lives lost because Soviet submarines had been able to position themselves advantageously thanks to compromised intelligence. No punishment could erase the operational advantage that had been surrendered through betrayal. Commander McKee, now Captain McKee, stood on the pier at New London, watching Dace prepare for another patrol. The submarine that had once hunted Soviet vessels with near impunity now operated in an environment transformed by espionage. The invisible distance that had protected American submarines, the acoustic advantage, the technological superiority, the tactical surprise, had been collapsed by one man's greed and 18 years of systematic treason. The Cold War underwater had always been dangerous. Submarines operating in the dark at depth, where mistakes meant death and where the enemy was invisible until too late. But submariners had accepted those dangers because they believed in their technological edge, in the superior quieting of American boats, in the intelligence superiority that SOSUS and surveillance operations provided. Walker had stolen that confidence. He'd shown that the greatest threat to submarine operations wasn't Soviet engineering or improved sonar or better tactics. The greatest threat was betrayal from within.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.